were few things in this world that Sera Blackwood truly despised. Meddling neighbors? Absolutely. People asking for love potions? Without question. Waking up in the middle of the night to find a ghost sighing at the foot of her bed? That was new. For a long moment, Sera just stared. The tall, semi-transparent man didn't disappear. He did, however, smile. At last, he breathed, gazing at her with stars in his annoyingly blue eyes. I finally found you, my love. Sera's exhausted brain processed this in 2 sluggish stages. This was a ghost. This ghost was flirting with her. So naturally, she screamed. Not a high-pitched, damsel in distress kind of scream. No, hers was a sharp, instinctive shout of outrage, like someone had just insulted her potion-making skills in broad daylight. To be clear, Sera was not the screaming type. But in her defense, it was 3 a.m. She lived alone, and there was an apparition standing beside her bed, looking at her like she'd personally walked out of his daydreams. Her pulse slammed hard against her ribs, the remnants of sleep still clinging to her brain as she instinctively reached for her wand on the nightstand. Because, of course, this would happen when she was most vulnerable. Her grip around it tightened, reassuring, steady, real, unlike the impossible figure before her. The ghost didn't even flinch. Instead, his expression softened as if she'd professed her undying love instead of reacted like any reasonable person would. I always knew I'd find you again, my love. A strange, unexpected flicker stirred in her chest, something cold and unsettling, like a half-forgotten memory brushing too close. Sera threw her pillow at his stupidly handsome face. It passed right through him. The ghost, because yes, fine, this was happening, looked mildly disappointed. Cranky, I see, he murmured. Sera's fingers dug into the smooth wood of her wand. Ghosts didn't linger in Moonbright, not unless they had unfinished business, or worse, dangerous intentions, which meant, with practiced precision, Sera aimed her wand straight at his semi-transparent chest. White-blue light crackled at her fingertips as she unleashed a banishing spell potent enough to send spirits howling back into the void. The air thrummed, and then fizzled out into absolutely nothing. The ghost beamed. Oh, darling, if it were that easy to get rid of me, do you think I'd have spent centuries searching for you? She froze. Centuries. An uneasy twist curled in her stomach. That was not a sentence she was emotionally or mentally equipped to deal with before sunrise. Still gripping her wand, Sera shoved herself out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cool wooden floor as she stomped toward the ghost with singular determination. Okay, she said flatly, jabbing a finger toward his shimmering form. I don't know who you are or why you're in my house, but you need to, Elias Thorne, the ghost said smoothly, offering a bow so exaggerated it would have belonged in a royal court, if not for the fact that this was her barely lit bedroom. Up close, he was even more irritating, because of course he would be the one ghost who looked like a complete storybook, tragic romance come to life. Messy dark hair, with enough stray strands falling into his blue eyes to look effortlessly haunted. A slightly tattered waistcoat, the fabric worn but still hinting at a life of adventure. Sharp cheekbones and a mouth made to kiss poetry into people's skin. Nope, absolutely not. Abort. Something about him itched at the edges of her mind, like she should know him, like she did once, long ago, in another life she didn't remember and didn't want to, which meant she needed to get rid of him immediately. Elias lifted his chin, utterly oblivious to her murderous intent. Ghost, poet, and, he added grandly, the man who has spent lifetimes searching for you. A sharp, involuntary pang rocked through Sera's chest, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, one she hadn't realized was missing. She ignored it. Instead, without a word, she turned straight out of her own bedroom, into her kitchen, where she poured herself a very large cup of tea. Behind her, the air shifted as Elias drifted into the room, because apparently ghosts didn't believe in personal space. "Do you need a moment?" he asked, his voice rich with amusement. Sera exhaled slowly. "I need you to not exist." Elias sighed dramatically. "Unfortunately, that is not an option." Her grip tightened around the handle of her mug. "Then let's focus on something easier," she muttered into her tea. "Like me kicking you out." Elias's expression softened, something unbearably fond settling in his gaze as he floated down until he was, eye level. "Oh, darling, you and I, we are bound by more than fate, a connection that—" Sera dumped the tea on him. The floors were now wet. Elias inspected his spectral arm, then glanced up with bemused admiration. "You are exactly as I remember," he murmured, almost to himself. Sera set down the teacup with a decisive thunk. "I'm going back to sleep." Elias's eyes widened. "Oh, are you tired?" Sera growled. "What I am is being haunted by a delusional apparition." Instead of taking the hint, his expression, infuriatingly, softened ever further. His voice dipped into something quieter, something dangerous. "Do you really not remember me?" A sharp pulse of something, not nostalgia, but something close, rippled through her chest. She didn't like it, didn't trust it, and certainly didn't want it. Sera folded her arms, locking her expression into cool indifference. "If we met in a past life, that sounds like a past me problem." His eyes darkened, filled with so much stupid, longing tragedy that it physically hurt to look at. "Ah, your sarcasm. Even in death, I never forgot it." She considered throwing her entire tea mug at him. Instead, she pinched the bridge of her nose and exhaled sharply through it. "Okay, fine. Let's assume for a moment that you aren't a hallucination brought on by too many late nights at the apothecary. What do you actually want?" His gaze searched hers, his spectral fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach toward her. "I just want to be with you." Sera's entire body tensed. Then, with zero hesitation, she turned sharply on her heel, walked back into her bedroom, and slammed the door in his face. Or rather, through his face, because he was a ghost. Moon-given hellfire. From the other side of the door, Elias sighed happily. "Good night, my love." Sera dropped her head into her hands. This was going to be a problem. There were bad ways to wake up. Sera had experienced quite a few. Exploding cauldrons, unannounced customers banging on the shop door at dawn, Tobias staging another dramatic intervention about her questionable work-life balance. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the realization that she was not, in fact, alone in her house this morning. For exactly 3 blissful seconds, she existed in ignorant, cozy oblivion, warm beneath her blankets, mind still heavy with sleep. Then the events of last night came crashing back like a poorly mixed potion. The ghost, the romantic idiot, the unwanted soul-bond nonsense. Sera squeezed her eyes shut tighter and took a deep, steadying breath. It was just a dream, she told herself. A very, very weird dream, probably caused by too much late-night reading. Or maybe I inhaled too many potion fumes at the shop. Yes, that was it. Too many fumes. No ghosts. No. The humming started. A languid, unhurried tune, low and rich and infuriatingly real. Sera's pulse kicked up before she could stop it. Her eyes snapped open. Elias Thorne, uninvited, unkillable, and undeterred by her attempts to get rid of him, was floating upside down near the ceiling, flipping through a book she owned, a book he should not be touching. He wasn't even reading it properly, just skimming the pages, grinning like he'd uncovered some delightful little secret. Sera turned her head ever so slowly toward him. He didn't disappear. Her fingers twitched around the edge of the blanket. Maybe, if she was very still, he would go away. Elias arched a brow without looking up from the pages. I can sense you pretending I don't exist, you know. Sera growled under her breath. She blinked, once, twice. Still there. Adrift in the early morning light, his dark hair fell in loose waves around his face, a few stray strands slipping across his irritatingly perfect features. The glow of dawn caught the sharp lines of his cheekbones, lantern light flickering off the edges of his tattered coat. His eyes were too blue, too knowing. Sera's stomach did not flutter. It just twitched, in irritation, obviously. Finally, Elias glanced down at her, or rather up, considering his topsy-turvy state. "Ah," he exclaimed, delighted. "You're awake. Did you dream of me?" Sera threw her pillow at his stupid, smug face. Predictably, it passed right through him. Elias sighed, flipping upright with almost lazy amusement. "That was terribly rude, darling. Is this how you always greet your soulmates?" Sera closed her eyes just long enough to find strength. Then she muttered something foul under her breath, yanked the blankets over her head, and decided, no. Nope. Not dealing with this yet. A beat of silence, then, "You know, darling," Elias mused, voice rich with amusement. "For someone so effortlessly enchanting, you do look quite ridiculous hiding under there." Sera erupted from her covers so fast her elbow knocked over a candle on the nightstand. "Why are you still here?" Elias, still floating, still smiling, tilted his head like a curious animal. "Because we are fated, dearest one." He drifted a little lower, hovering just over the foot of the bed, destined to find each other across lifetimes, bound by an eternal... Nope. Sera swung her legs over the edge of the bed, grabbing a robe as she stomped out of the room. Elias, undeterred, trailed behind her like a lost puppy. "I must say, you're handling this rather well," he informed her, voice warm with praise and mischief. Most people, upon discovering they have an amorous spirit attached to them, would react with more... He paused, clearly searching for the right word. Sera snatched the teapot from the counter. "Enthusiasm," Elias decided at last. Sera poured herself a cup of tea, very deliberately added a hefty shot of whiskey, and took a slow, measured sip. Elias, watching her with open fascination, let out a low chuckle. "Ah, a morning drinker. How charming." "I wouldn't be if I weren't being haunted by a flirtatious corpse." Elias pressed a ghostly hand over his heart, tragic and theatrical. "Darling, if I were a corpse, I wouldn't be able to appreciate the way the morning light looks on your..." Sera held up a finger. "Finish that sentence and I will track down the nearest priest." Elias's grin turned positively wolfish. "Wouldn't work. I was quite religious in my time. They'd probably take my side." Sera ground her teeth together. "Fine. If magic wouldn't get rid of him, maybe old-fashioned spirit deterrence would." Still holding his gaze, she reached for the salt shaker. Elias's expression remained unfazed. Then she flung a handful of salt directly at him. Salt rained in a shimmering arc, scattering across the floorboards like tiny flecks of moonlight. Elias gasped and staggered backward with an exaggerated groan, clutching at his heart as though he were mortally wounded. "Ah, you wound me!" he cried as if she'd struck him with steel. "So cruel, so heartless." One eye peeked open. His gaze flickered down to his own transparent form. His lips curved. "Ah," he mused, inspecting his ghostly hand. "What a relief." Then he winked at her. "I remain devastatingly handsome." Sera set the salt shaker down with a decisive thunk. "Worth a try," she muttered. Elias laughed, but there was something softer in his expression now. Less mischief, more nostalgia. He drifted toward the window, looking beyond it as if he could see something past the present moment. "I used to love breakfasts," he said absently, his voice quieter now. "Fresh bread, thick with honey. Coffee so rich it stained my lips. Music playing from the market square below. I could never start the day without it." Something tightened in Sera's chest before she could identify what. Elias turned back to her, smiling as if shaking the thought away. "Most of all," he murmured, "I miss the warmth." Sera swallowed. She should not care, should not want to. Was it always doomed? She asked suddenly, before she could stop herself. Elias blinked. "What?" She exhaled, irritated with herself. Whatever this was, in our supposedly past life, was it always bad? Elias looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. Then, with uncharacteristic softness, "No." Something in her chest clenched, and that was enough emotions for the morning. Without a word, she picked up her tea, drained the whiskey-laced liquid in one defiant gulp, and turned on her heel. Without missing a beat, she stomped right back to her bedroom, slamming the door in his ghostly, poetic face. Sera dropped face first into her pillow. This was definitely going to be a problem.